Good morning. So this is Sunday morning and it is July 29th. And I want to talk to you about something that I heard this morning. It really shook me. I was doing one of my women's Bible studies this morning, and one of the women in my online coaching group in my Bible study told me about something horrific that had happened in her church over this last week. And I am actually going to drop these links in the chat, in the comments underneath. Oh my goodness, it's still early. It's really hot in my house, and I'm sorry, my brain's moving a little bit slowly. But so early this morning, I heard this story about out in Washington State, where a beloved woman in a local Seventh-day Adventist church there had been found dead in her fifth wheel this last week. And at first I thought, oh, that's really sad. And then the person telling me the story went on to tell me that it was not actually like she died of a heart attack or something. She was murdered, at least allegedly. They believe that she was murdered, and her murderer has been, the person they believe has killed her has been arrested on charges of domestic violence and murder, and she was shot and found dead in her fifth wheel. And so I actually went looking to get some information because I hear stories like this a lot. Did you know that in a typical day, there are 20,000 phone calls to domestic violence hotlines? And every single minute, just in the United States of America, more than 20 people a minute are abused by an intimate partner. That means 10 million men and women a year suffer abuse by an intimate partner. So I want to tell you what happened with this story that really shook me this morning, because I felt like crying when I heard this story. This woman had told friends that she was scared. She had told people that she wanted to leave, and she had asked people from church if they would come and go with her to her fifth wheel to help her get things to get out safely. And the next day, she was found shot in the head, presumably. And I only say that because there is no conviction, and I'm trying to be careful just from a legal standpoint. But the police reports and the news articles that are in the comments below say that her husband was arrested for shooting her in the head, and that previously he had made threats that if things didn't go his way, he was going to blow her brains out and kill himself. Well, what happened was, apparently, he blew her brains out, but did not kill himself. And here's the thing. She knew she was in danger. And this is like a grandmother figure. This is not like some young, naive woman. Not that young, naive women aren't also in equal danger when someone makes a threat. But she was 68 years old. She was actively involved in her church. She had been a caregiver for other families' children. And the person who shot her, the husband in this situation, was a local Bible worker in their Seventh-day Adventist church. He'd preached in all the area local churches. He was one of the good guys who everybody loved and respected, and nobody would ever dream has this kind of side to him. But she knew things weren't okay enough to ask people who she knew had guns to go with her to get stuff so that she could get away safely. And when that didn't happen, she ended up dead. So here's besides grieving for this woman that I've never even met, but I know people who knew her and loved her. Besides grieving for that, I feel compelled to share this story because it happens a lot. Even if the woman doesn't end up dead, this kind of thing happens a lot. And so what blows my mind so often is that church people, pastors, church leaders typically think that when a woman comes and says, I'm scared or something's wrong, that somehow in the bandwidth, the spectrum of abuse, that this is like the first 10%. And she's just, being a little emotional or making things up or just can't handle it or needs to go home and be more submissive and play nice and, cook supper on time, as though that will fix the sinful, violent character of an abusive person who is acting with the spirit of power and control instead of with the Spirit of God. And so we have this mentality in church that if the woman just is nicer or doesn't have opinions, that it will fix the abusive pattern, and it won't. Because no person not getting supper on time or something else is going to turn a good person into an abuser. An abusive person is abusive because of what is wrong in their soul, not because of someone else and their victim's actions. So here, when you're a church leader, and I'm speaking specifically to pastors, elders, deacons, women's ministry leaders, men's ministry leaders, if someone comes to you and says they're scared, if someone comes to you and says it's not okay, even if they're just kind of giving you a tiny glimpse into their situation, it is absolutely wrong to instinctively assume that this is in the first 10% of the abuse bandwidth. Do you know why? Because shame is overwhelming for abuse victims. And by the time someone's shame is smaller than their fear of being hurt, you aren't in the first 10% of that abuse spectrum. You're somewhere in the last 10 to 3%. By the time a woman has gathered the courage to come to a church leader and say, I'm scared, please help me, it's bad. It's so much worse than you can imagine at home, because you know what? Nobody is willing to overcome the shame and embarrassment of admitting that they are in an abusive situation. And most of the time, women don't even realize they are in an abusive situation for that first 80 to 90% of the abuse spectrum and the bandwidth. So if you are a church leader, learn from this, please. If someone comes to you and expresses fear and expresses difficulty and expresses pain, shame, anguish, and asks for help in any way, even if it's like a soft ask, like hashtag asking for a friend kind of thing, listen to them. Because they would never have gotten the courage to come talk to you in the first 80 to 90% of the abuse spectrum. Number two, that's number one. By the time someone asks for help, it's bad, and listen. Number two, if you are an intimate partner and someone makes a threat to you, listen to them. If you are a spouse and someone in your family, your spouse, a parent, a sibling, but I'm specifically talking about intimate partner violence and intimate partner abuse. If your spouse or your partner says that if you don't do things their way, they're going to do X, Y, Z, if they choke you, if they threaten to use a gun, if they say things like, it's going to get ugly and it will be your fault, listen to what they are telling you. Do not assume that they're simply blowing off steam and they're never going to actually do that. Pay attention. If you get that kind of threat in your relationship, please go looking for help. Please go and do not stop until you find someone who is willing to help you. Do not assume that you are going to be okay. Now, according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the presence of a gun in a home with domestic violence increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Did you hear me? The presence of a gun in a home where domestic violence is a factor increases the risk of homicide by 500%. If you are being threatened or have been threatened and your intimate partner owns or has access to guns, please Do not shrug it off and ignore that. Please take that seriously. Other statistics that are worth knowing. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men are abused by intimate partners every year. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men are victims of severe intimate partner violence. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men are stalked every year up to the point of fear of harm or death by an intimate partner. Domestic violence is not just physical violence. The domestic violence umbrella includes emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, and verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is physical abuse of the brain and organ tissues. Let me repeat that. Emotional and verbal abuse is physical abuse of brain and organ tissues. It is sometimes even more insidious than actual physical bruises, because the soundtrack of emotional and verbal abuse plays over and over again in your head for the rest of your life if you don't intentionally take that by the horns and learn to reprogram how you think. And that is a huge process of healing for anyone who's been emotionally and verbally abused by an intimate partner. So when I am talking about this, as far as in the church, I don't care how great the husband looks. And I recognize I'm speaking to women right now. This does not mean that I am saying that women are the only victims of domestic violence. But so no haters on that, okay? But right now I'm speaking to women, and I'm speaking from the context of women to women. If there is a man who, if your spouse is, let me rephrase that. If you are in a church and a woman comes saying that she is afraid in her home, or that she is being abused in some way in her home, or that things are not good, I don't care how great that guy looks and acts at church. I don't care how well he knows his Bible. I don't care if he's the main preacher or a lay preacher. I don't care if he's giving Bible studies to other people and working in some ministry capacity, or always the first one to show up for the church work bee. I don't care. That does not mean they are not an abusive person at home. Okay? It doesn't mean that. Just that it is a myth that someone that just because someone is charismatic in public, that means they are not dangerous in private. And we see these things happening and those stories playing out over and over and over again, like the news story from this weekend in Washington State, where the Bible worker has apparently, allegedly, where he's been arrested for shooting his wife in the head. Let me recap. By the time a woman asks for help, it's bad. Take it seriously. If you are in an intimate partner situation where the other person threatens your well-being or the well-being of your children, please do not assume that they are not going to follow through just because they get nice again after that abuse cycle is done. It is threats, especially if there is also any access to weapons, are far too often carried through unexpectedly. And if someone tells you that they're scared, pay attention. Do not tune them out. Do not tell them to go back and be nicer. Do not give them unbiblical advice. When Jesus saw people and when Jesus saw women in dangerous situations, he pointed out the sins of the abusers, and then he covered the woman and protected her. That is how we should be acting in church when someone is scared. Now, if you are, I don't want to leave without giving one practical thing. If you are in a terrifying situation, if you are scared, the Domestic Violence National Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. And if you are in a situation and nobody is listening to you, please call that, so that you don't end up on a newspaper headline as another statistic of one of the thousands of people all over the United States of America that are victims of intimate partner violence, like the story that prompted this video today.